What's up, everybody? This is Ben, and today I'm going to show you this project that I've been working on, and it is silly, but it's a ton of fun, and if you have very particular use cases like I do, it might be actually useful for you. So what we're doing today is we're turning our humble Roland MC-101 into, I think, a very excellent tone wheel organ emulation. So we're going to talk all about the mod matrix, we're going to talk about external CV control, we're going to talk about external keyboards, and we're going to talk about organs. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing is, why might we want to do this? Now, I play in cover bands and like bands sometimes, and I am a keys player. And that means I play piano, I play synthesizers, and I play organ, and sometimes I play trumpet or whatever else needs to get done, or weird samples. The keys player just does that. We do lots of stuff. So it might not be immediately obvious, but I think that playing organ and playing piano and playing synthesizers are all completely different skill sets. And personally, of the three, I am the weakest at organ versus the others. So I set out to practice playing organ. So while I was practicing playing organ, now the MC-101 has pretty good organs built into it. There's a couple of good presets in the organ list that have gotten me through plenty of like bar gigs and whatever, playing Doors tunes, and you can do just fine playing with the presets that are in it. But there's a couple of things that organ players do that you can't do with the presets, and those are manipulate drawbars on the fly. They are messing around with the percussion and click elements, and just general like organ chop kind of things you can't necessarily do with those presets, which is fine for almost all use cases. But for me, I wanted to just practice some of those skills, even though I'll probably never use this at a gig. But that said, let's talk about what we've got set up here. So the first thing you'll see, I have a Novation Launchpad X here, which is my favorite like keyboard input type of device lately. We have a Launch Control XL here, which is one of the best MIDI controllers that mankind has come up with, in my personal opinion. And of course we have our Roland MC-101 here. Now, both of these controllers only have a USB MIDI out, so they're both connected to a Raspberry Pi, which is configured as a USB host device. You can buy commercial ones, but for me, the Raspberry Pi was the most efficient and cheap. And it powers all three of these devices, which is really nice, as well as translates MIDI between them. So that's what's going on here. Right here, we have a visual representation of the sounds coming out. That is FL Studio's Wave Candy. And that, I think, covers the setup. So what is the patch like? So the first thing we want to think about is what makes an organ sound. And really what makes a tone wheel organ sound, like the Hammonds, like the Spinets or whatever, I'm not up to date on all of the organs that existed in the 60s and 70s, but the gist is that they're adding sine waves together. So they have different drawbars that you can pull that add sine waves to the sound, and they make that organ sound that we all know and love. Now, the cool thing about the MC-101 is that, depending on how you think about it, you have 16 different partials that you can add, and your typical organ only uses 9 sine waves, and then maybe some other stuff. But we easily can make 9 sine waves. So that's the first thing that I did. Oh, no, not true. The first thing that I did, and you will have to do this if you have a setup like this. I believe T-Breaks Beats has a video on how to do this if you don't have an external controller with like one MIDI cable that loops back in. I'll have to look that up and find that for you, and hopefully it'll be up here in the corner. But what I've done here is, if you hit Shift and Filter brings you to the utility, then you hit System, and then we scroll over to the track. channels. So you see, I set all 4 tracks to the same channel. They're all set to channel 1 for this patch. So when you pull this up, you're gonna wanna set that. And when you leave to go to something else, you're gonna wanna change that back to something that makes more sense. Because this way, if you play one note on channel 1, all 4 channels are going to trigger, which is really, really useful for layering stuff like this, but can get in the way at other points that you might not want. The only other thing I will mention is that I have my control channel is channel 16, which we'll just want to know what that control channel is later. But that's what I have. I have all 4 tracks set to channel 1, and control channel set to channel 16. So, with that said, I'm pushing stuff and nothing is happening. I was gonna make this patch live, but I spent at least a few hours setting up this patch, so it didn't seem practical to make live. So I'll put the patch and the launch control layout up on my Patreon, but I will explain all of it enough that you should be able to make it just fine on your own. So yeah, that's that. If you have any questions, obviously, please don't hesitate to ask them. But the first thing we're gonna do is let's just look at channel 1. I can stop the sequencer for the moment. We're just gonna look at track 1, and I'm gonna hit Shift, Sound, Partial Edit, and we're gonna talk about what we've got. So it's very simple. Every oscillator is set to virtual analog, wave is set to sine, and that's actually it. Level is set to 100. And then this is the interesting part. So each stop, each drawbar is the level of one particular sine wave. And there's just a list of what those are. You can just look up that list. I have an example of that list here, which you can see here. Oh, I just shook that camera. You can't see it. I'll just put it up. I'll just put a picture up. But basically, the lowest one is the 16. It's labeled 16, and the labels that they have are based on feet of an organ, of a pipe organ, like how long that physically was in a pipe organ. But basically, the first one is set to 12 below the fundamental. 2 is set to a fifth or 7 steps above the fundamental. 3 is the fundamental. And then from there, it's 12 semitones, 19 semitones, 24 semitones, 28, 31, and 36 for the 9. So it spans about 3 octaves, and every drawbar just controls the level of one of those. So you can see here, channel 2 course tune is at 7, oscillator 3 course tune is 0, oscillator 4 course tune is 12. Those are the first 4. And then when it gets where it gets interesting, in my opinion, is now they're set to matrix 1. We're only editing partial 1 because only this sound light is lit up. The source is CC50. It's 2 level, and the depth is minus 63, which is negative, because on a drawbar organ, you pull the stops out to make them louder, and I wanted to emulate that here. So we're gonna come over here to our Novation components, which is Novation software to control what happens on the launch pad, or on the launch control. I'm gonna try to overlay this, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing. But we can see that this fader here is set to control CC50 on MIDI channel 1. So when I turn this down, when I bring this fader down, we fade the sound in. Now it's pretty quiet, but that's okay. We're gonna, as we build more things, we're gonna get more sound here. But that's how that works. And then for each partial, if we only edit partial 2, matrix 1, we can see the source is CC51 to level, and the depth is minus 63. And this continues for all 4 of the partials here. So, and you should be able to see that. You can see each one fading in on this guy here. That's already sounding pretty organy, but that's only the first 4. So now when we bring up we bring up track 2, we have exactly the same thing going on. Oh, well, I mean, I should say that, so this fader is set to CC50, this is 51, 52, 53, etc. But then, yeah, so now on channel 2, you have the next ones. These are all also sine waves, and you have them set at plus 24, plus 28, plus 31, and then whatever the first one was, I don't remember off the top of my head, but you get the idea. And then we have exactly the same thing, CC 55 to level, depth, and that is true for, you know, each one, each partial. So that way we can add our sine waves and we get an organ tone, which is really great, in my opinion. Now, the only other thing is that the 9th one is partial 1 on track 3. So partial 1 is sine wave. Simple enough. And then that is controlled by the next CC in line, which is actually this one, because we don't have 9 faders. So the last one is controlled by CC 58, which is this knob, and that is set in a positive direction, because it just didn't make sense to me to turn the knob down, but so we can turn the knob up this way. But if you want, you can change that and make that go negative as well in the mod matrix. So, I mean, that's the gist. That made me pretty happy with, that gave me pretty comfortable control over the organ. However, it's the MC-101. There's always more that we can do. So the first thing that we can do, which actually it's been on the whole time, is a rotary speaker. So these organs had to be connected to a speaker, and the speaker you connected it to, very typically, the sound of it was the Leslie speaker, which was a rotating horn that made the signature organ sound. So we have that built in because, of course, we do. So the multi-effects, I just have it set to rotary. There's a VK rotary as well, but I just have it set to rotary. And you can hear without it, that sounds, sounds a little bit flat, but you turn it on and you got an organ sound, especially if you got headphones on. So there's your organ sound. Now the cool thing about the organ is that as an effect, a lot of players use the switch between the slow and the fast speaker cone speed. So we've got that right on this knob. You move it past 50% and it speeds up. So that's real nice to do, right? If you're you got all whatever you want to do from there. So that's really great. That's right on the multi-effect. I leave the multi-effect on all the time, and then I just tweak this up and down above 50% and below 50%, which I think that works really nicely. So that, that's really good. That's a good organ sound that we've got going on here. And I think that, like, it's effective. It's accurate to how the organs produced the sounds, and I think it's very, very cool. There's a few other things, though, that you might want to have on an organ, and I have to recommend, if you're really interested in this, like I was, I've spent a long time, there's a series of articles published by Gordon Reed in Sound on Sound magazine from 2003 and 2004. There's like 4 or 5 articles that span that winter about trying to replicate a Hammond organ on analog synths of that time. And he uses a Juno and he uses a Prophet 10. And he mentions that Genesis, the band, toured with a Prophet 10 emulating a Hammond organ. And it's incredible stuff, the way that Gordon Reed in 2003 was able to recreate that on a Prophet 10. And it's a fantastic read. There's a lot of really cool stuff. I'll link it below. I encourage you to read it. And he mentioned some other things that you might want to do to more accurately represent a Hammond organ. And that's what we're going to do now. So you'll notice I've got the colors here set as close to how I normally would with, how you normally would see them with a drawbar. So like these two are red. In real life, they're brown, I think. These are yellow, and they would be white in real life. And then the black, or the ones that would normally be black, are the green ones here. And this last one has a yellow light above it, indicating that, this is a white key. And they are just, that coloring indicates relation to the fundamental, where the yellow ones are octaves, and the green ones are fifths and thirds. Well, these two I think are fifths, and this one I believe is a third. But that helps you know what kind of sound you're making with the dissonance and whatnot. So all of these have lights. I know normally on a launch control, like this light is telling you something about this knob. In this case, these lights are telling you something about the faders underneath them, and these lights are telling you about these knobs. So this one, yellow, that's a fundamental. That's your highest frequency, right? But then you got these three are red, and they are like additions that I think are really good, and you find them on Hammond emulations. I did quite a bit of work comparing this to the GarageBand Hammond emulation because I had that. And I think this sounds really, really good compared to that. And one reason is because it has, what we have on the MC-101 is changeable key noise. So like the key noise was a mistake on the originals, but it became an important part of the sound, especially for cutting through like a blues mix or something. So this being the MC-101, if we go to partial edit on channel 3, we actually, if you go to oscillator, a PCM oscillator, Wavebank A, number 456 is called organ click. So this is set up the same way as the others, where this knob controls level for the click. And it gives you the click. And if I turn these down, you can hear it better. I'm very sorry, but I should have mentioned this earlier. On all of our sine waves, there's a slight amplitude envelope where I just have the attack set to about 12 because that gets rid of the clickiness of starting a sine wave in the middle. So that sounds smooth. If you want it to sound clickier, you can turn that attack down and you will get like sort of random-ish clicks. But for the key noise, I feel like it sounded better to have this separate knob for the key noise. And that sounds really good, I think. I'll show you with like a backing track in a few minutes so you can hear all of it together. But yeah, so this knob with the red indicator above it gives you key noise. And I think that's really cool. Now, the next knob here gives you an actual setting that they had on some of the original organs, which is percussion. And the percussion, what that was at that point was it was a tight envelope on the 4th and 2 2/3 drawbar. And that's super easy to set up on the MC-101. So again, on channel 3, partial 3 and 4, we just have sine waves again. They're set to plus 19 and plus 12. And then they have amplitude envelopes that are very low decay, very low sustain, or I think zero sustain, zero decay, zero attack. Simple enough to set that up. And the level of both of those is controlled by this knob here. So if I get rid of some of this. So since there's zero attack there, you're getting a little bit of that clickiness, which is not abnormal for the organ. And it really, you hear that? It gives that like pop to the front of the sound a little bit, especially in the lower registers, and that can be really useful again for helping this stand out. And this was a feature on some of the organs. And I think that sounds pretty good. The last knob that we have here that's red is for leakage, which in modern times is just emulated by a little bit of noise. So oscillator 4, we just have one oscillator active here, and it's just noise. It's just noise. But if we turn this up, it's noise. But a little bit of it can sound like the key leakage, and it can be useful for your sound design. You could filter that a little bit. I haven't dug into the best way to filter that to emulate that, but it's there. Obviously, you have a whole oscillator, you have a whole track to do it with on track 4. So, you know, you can experiment with that if you want. But yeah, that's just, you know, and then that's just the next CC in the chain. That is CC 61 that happens to do that. And I mean, that's good. That's really good. Like, that's a lot of features that you can do and use this as an organ emulator. And that, I think, is really, really cool. But there's always a little more. There's always a little bit more that we can do. So these two knobs here with the orange lights above them are set to, they're set to CC 81 and 82. Now, if you pull up the Roland MC-101 MIDI implementation chart, you will find that CC 81 and 82 are always going to control the mod knob and the FX knob on whatever track that you're sending the information to. Now, we're sending the information to all of the tracks at once, so it's controlling those two knobs on all of the tracks, which is useful because then you don't have to change them on each track. And so these knobs are set to reverb send and delay send. So reverb, common effect on an organ. We can turn that on. Which one's reverb? This one's reverb. And you can mess with the reverb settings if you'd like to. But the delay one, I don't know if many people know this, but the master delay effect on the MC-101 can be many kinds of delays. And one thing that is an effect that we don't think of as a delay, but really is just a delay, is chorus. So if you actually if you hit Shift and Multi-Effect and you come over to delay, you can change the delay type to be chorus. And so for an organ where chorus was a common effect, but delay wasn't, I've just set the delay send to be a send to a chorus. So this is a subtle chorus, which is not that different from what was on the Hammond, but it's there, and you can just turn this knob to send it to add chorus, which just thickens the sound up a little bit, which is pretty nice. And this one is reverb, which is pretty nice. So you've got those two options as well. And then, you know, all that's good, all that's really good, and I still like it, but we can still squeeze a little bit more out of this, in my opinion. So the other thing that we've got is we've got some buttons down here. And the cool thing about these buttons with a launchpad is that you can set them to either toggle or momentary. And you can set them to just send CC values. So once again, if we come here to our CC MIDI implementation chart, which actually maybe you can't see, but you can go look it up. CC 76, I believe, is vibrato rate. And then CC 77 is vibrato depth. So what I've actually done here is this knob here, which is right here, sends MIDI CC 76, which controls vibrato rate. I will mention the LED I just set to channel 13 so that it's not impacted by like playing notes, because sometimes that's a thing that happens. If you have a Launch Control XL, you probably know that. But it happens. So I just set it to channel 13, which is not being used for anything. So whatever I play anywhere is not going to change the lights. So the lights will stay where they are. That was really useful to me. But then these three buttons down here, or rather, let's start with these. These are set to send CC77, which is vibrato depth. So they set each one sends a different value. You can see here. This one goes from 0 to 90, 110, or 127. So they set different values for the vibrato depth. So that's subtle. I really like this one if I don't want to reach over here to flick this switch. That's a nice vibrato effect. This one's more, and this one's even more. You can change these if you want to, but this is what I set. But yeah, so these three are just buttons that will trigger the vibrato, which is how vibrato worked on a Hammond. Like it was just a switch or something. Or even sometimes like a knee switch, which is pretty neat. But then the three buttons above them are set to toggle. So when you press them, it'll turn it on or turn it off, which is really useful. as just a switch. You can just turn it on or turn it off. And I really like that, and it's a nice technique. If, you know, you're doing whatever, you play it and you can just hit the button, which is pretty useful. The next two, these are the final effects that we have going on here. There's been quite a few already. These are the last ones. And they use scatter. I know in one of my videos recently, I talked about how you can use scatter as like an extra multi-effect. But if you have an external controller that can set toggle, you can have 2 extra multi-effects, because you really do have 2 extra multi-effects on scatter. So what's going on is I just hit shift project and then a pad, and it clears the pad and it turns blue. And then you can come and all you do is you can set the dry level, the MFX1 send, the MFX2 send, and the dry level for each pad. So pad 2, 100% to MFX2. Pad 1 is MFX send 200 to MFX1, 130 to the dry. That's just like a balance that I did in my head that I'll talk about in a second. But then the important bit is, once again, if we look at the MIDI implementation chart, at the bottom in the notes, it says scatter pad 60 to 75 on control channel. And that means that if you send note 60 to scatter, it'll be like pushing this button. Whoops, you gotta hit play. The sequencer has to be running. It can be empty, but it has to be running. So with play pressed, right, you hear the difference there? But if I push it here, same thing. But if I have it set to hold, so this one, and components, this is set to octave 3, note C, that's 60. On channel 16, that's our control channel from before. But so the top one, or the bottom one is set to momentary, which means it activates when I press it. But the top one is set to toggle. So so this is an overdrive effect. If I just want to turn on the overdrive effect, I just hit it once. And we're good to go. We can just play. And that's really, really useful. So these ones, the first one is an overdrive effect, which is not an uncommon effect for an organ. It's actually if you hit shift and scatter, you can edit the MFX 1 and 2. This is an electric piano amp sim. I have some settings on it. Mess around with it till it sounds good to you. And then I have the dry mix in as well, like you saw. But yeah, so whatever you feel like sounds good. And then the next one, channel 4, is the phonograph effect, because I just love the phonograph effect. And actually, I feel like if you want to play like some creepy circus music type of stuff, it's kind of neat for that. Or whatever, I don't necessarily know how to write that. I had something going before. Something like that. Like you can be real silly with it. And if you wanted a different multi-effect for that, all you got to do is hit shift scatter and change the MFX2 to literally anything else. But yeah, so that's the whole patch. I hope that was in some way useful to you. I know it was a lot of talking, but yeah, I've just been having a great time with this. I don't know that I'd use it to play, because like I said, it takes a little bit of setup. But it's just to load the project and then change your channels to match what you want them to be, your track channels to match what you want them to be, and then when you load a new project, you're gonna have to change them back, because that's a global setting. But if you're gonna sit down and just play organ, I think it's really nice to have. I really do. So with all that said, I'm just gonna pull up a little track here, and I'm just gonna jam a little bit. This is Quist Chicago Blues backing track in A. Quist makes great backing tracks on YouTube. Check him out. He also makes real music. He's got a new album coming out, so check that out. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. It's been great fun. It's really been great fun. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.